All right, thank you everyone so much for joining us for the 2022 PAEE virtual conference. It's in our nature. I'm really excited to be moderating this particular session because this is a program I participate in that I love, and I'm really excited for you all to learn about it and hopefully participate in it as well. But today we have Sarah Koenig and Tim Byen from the Audubon Society of Western PA here to talk about community conservation through backyard habitat. So just some real quick housekeeping notes. Please leave yourself on mute so that we don't have any interruptions today. If you need or want to ask questions, please put them in the chat. We're going to save them for last. And don't forget to check out the exhibitors and also our awesome PAEE swag store, which has 15% off for the duration of the conference for today and tomorrow. So make sure you get your PAEE swag. I have my PAEE shirt on today. And with that, thank you, Sarah and Tim, and you can take it away.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Julie. And welcome, everyone. Thank you for spending your Monday morning with us. I'm really excited to connect with you all and talk a bit more about this program that is definitely near and dear to our hearts. So first, a little bit about Audubon Society of Western Pennsylvania. We are a little over 100-year-old chapter of the National Audubon Society, but we are an independent nonprofit. We have been connecting people to birds and nature since 1916 through our places, programs, and projects, which I'll talk a little bit more about in the following slides. Our service area or territory is the 7 counties of southwestern Pennsylvania, including the city of Pittsburgh. My name is Sarah Koenig. As Julie mentioned, I'm the conservation director, and joining me is Tim Byen, who official title is what's a land steward, but he oversees habitat management on our properties and beyond our properties. So our places, we have a number of 4 public properties, including Beechwood Farms Nature Reserve, which is probably our most popular property, and Fox Chapel just outside of Pittsburgh. We also have Buffalo Creek Nature Park and Todd Nature Reserve in Sarver, and Suckup Nature Park in Penn Township. We estimate that approximately 60,000 people visit the properties each year, and we certainly saw those numbers go up, during COVID, and are excited to see them continue to, people are still excited about visiting the properties currently. So when people think Audubon, they often think birds, but we also, teach people about a lot beyond birds. So a big thing that we talk about and help people improve their habitat with is native plants. Also a lot of programs on pollinators, natural history. And we work with populations from, kids, preschool to even senior center programming. So our small but mighty education team was able to deliver well over 500 programs last year, directly engaging almost 14,000 people. And projects. This is more my, this is kind of my wheelhouse. So these are just some examples of some of the projects that we do. Our Chimney Swift Tower program has over 150 chimney swift towers throughout southwestern PA. So, this provides, these unique towers provide habitat for these aerial insectivores, but also is a great opportunity to engage people. In the center there is a project that we just launched last year that I'm incredibly excited about. We've been working with groups like PennDOT and energy companies to transform rights-of-way corridors into wonderful habitat for monarchs and other imperiled insects. On the bottom right is just a riparian buffer planting on possibly one of the most beautiful pieces of property I've ever seen. So now to talk about our backyard habitat program, which is why we're here. We launched this program in 2018, and it was modeled off of a similar program initially launched by Portland Audubon. They've been doing it for, I think, 14 years now and have well over 5,000 participants. So we see this program as a way to really transform habitat across the region. We're able to work with individuals, whether they have a small patio to work with or a very large yard, but it's really an opportunity for folks to make, improve habitat in their own space. Depending on the source that you look at, habitat loss and urbanization are absolutely a primary source or a major source of habitat loss and reduction of biodiversity. And some sources say that it's absolutely the primary cause of the loss of biodiversity. So working with private landowners across the region is really an opportunity to, we think of it as a distributed nature reserve. So these certified backyard habitats throughout southwestern PA are absolutely improving habitat quality, habitat connectivity, provides an opportunity for better stopover and breeding habitat, places that native insects can thrive, and then also offer a lot of co-benefits as well, such as improved water quality. In addition to the real, ecological benefits of this program, though, a lot of it is about the people. So, we actually go out to each yard, and it's an opportunity for that individual to take action, to really make a difference. They're also learning new skills, hopefully, also seeing some increased biodiversity in their own space. So, by connecting with each individual, it's really a wonderful opportunity to build relationships. Some folks that participate in the program have been doing this for 10, 20, 30 years, and some folks are brand new. So it's really been just really a wonderful opportunity to build our network and deepen our relationships with folks. Lauren, who was the first person that was working on certified backyard habitat, said that it restored her faith in humanity. So it's really, really been a great opportunity to work with good people to make a difference. And a lot of folks now, they're thinking about expanding beyond their yard. So working in community spaces, talking to their elected officials about how important it is to support birds and plant with native plants and improve habitat. So we're starting to see kind of the step up from their individual backyard, which is absolutely wonderful. So how does the program work? There are 5 categories, and as I mentioned, we visit each property as to look at where folks are at in the 5 categories, which are native plants, natural products, wildlife stewardship, clean water, and education and engagement. So after we visit each site, we do develop a custom report and resources and try to stay in touch with them to help make sure that they move through the process and actually get certified. And there are 3 certification categories. So we've got Guardian is kind of our silver level, Gold is the champion level, and Platinum is hero. And just again, those 5 categories. So we're trying to work with people to think, holistically of how they can improve habitat. So the first category, native plants. We're both looking at coverage and creating habitat layers. So, the coverage, we debated what value, should be that minimum coverage, but we actually settled on 5% for that silver level, 15% for the gold level, and 40+% for the platinum level. And the thinking here is that let's just get people, connected to the idea of planting with native plants, and that, they don't have to be 100% native, but even by planting some native plants, they can make a difference. And so hopefully, once you get them in the door and they're really excited thinking about this, they'll move up ideally from the 5%. But it's just really about starting small and making sure that people can get excited about what can be done in their backyard. So in addition to the coverage, we also encourage folks to create habitat layers. So they're, providing those various layers where birds and native insects can thrive. So at minimum, we ask that folks have 3, the herbaceous, the shrub, and an understory tree, which is actually all that I can have in my small city lot. But where they have more space to reach those golden or platinum levels, we ask for all 4 layers that they add a canopy tree as well. So to help them, expand their native plant, offerings in their backyard, we do provide we provide plant lists based on their interest and their conditions. So for example, some people are really excited about supporting hummingbirds or seeing hummingbirds. So we, provide those lists. A lot of folks are jazzed about edible native plants. So we put together those resources and share them, based on conditions and interests. We also, during the site visit and in the report, we assist with native plant identification and invasive plant identification. We'll just spend a couple minutes here. I know that you're all environmental educators and probably have already thought a lot about how to create habitat, but want to just, this is such a critical point that I think we talk about in almost every single presentation that we do. So why native plants? Bird and insect populations are experiencing dramatic declines, depending on where you look. Insects, for example, I think a study out of Germany in 2017 was looking at a 76% decline of aerial insects, looking at biomass. So that's a shocking number, over 75%. So just how can, we're always thinking of how can we support our native insects, which are critical for the success of birds. Our native insects and native plants have co-evolved over thousands and thousands of years. And birds really need insects. One stat is that almost all land birds feed their baby. They need those like protein-rich insects for the survival of their babies. So, we need a lot of insects to ensure that birds can survive or thrive, really. So, one University of Delaware study, led by Doug Tallamy with a great supporting team. Doug Tallamy's just been a really wonderful, he's a great scientist, but also a great storyteller that gets people really excited about what they can do in their backyard. So this is just one of his studies, showed that when comparing non-native to native landscaped yards, those non-native yards had approximately 75% fewer caterpillars and were 60% less likely to have breeding chickadees. And where there was breeding happening, those non-native landscapes had like a much lower chance of survival and fledgling. And this number, this bottom number always kind of, even though I've said it a lot, it still continues to surprise me every time because it's really significant. So just one brood of chickadees needs 9,000 caterpillars to fledge. So when you begin to think of the fact that a native oak tree can support 557 species of caterpillars, or moth and butterfly Lepidoptera or caterpillars, and a ginkgo tree, which is just an absolutely beautiful tree, but a non-native tree that supports anywhere from 0 to 5 species of caterpillars. So if you have the space and you can only plant one tree, definitely go for an oak. And then thinking about the value of those trees and really the connection of the moth and butterfly Lepidoptera to individual species, it's really linking that back to these chickadees, really, I think, drives the story home of how important native plants are. So the second category, natural products. We're, again, really trying to get people to think holistically about how they can create good habitat in their backyard. And a critical way that they can do that is absolutely to reduce or eliminate their chemical use. Everyone, we just really make sure that they're avoiding all neonics, and then beyond the use of the neonics or avoiding neonics, we're really trying to work with them to reduce or eliminate their chemical use. On the right here is a great resource that we found. This Xerces guide actually looks at the brand name of different chemicals and identifies if they have neonics or not. And that's incredibly helpful because reading a label, for example, can be a little challenging to understand if there's a neonic or not. And this is just a really wonderful resource to help people make that decision. So our third category of the 5 is wildlife stewardship. And one thing that we are not negotiating on is that cats need to be indoors. They can also be in a catio or supervised on a leash. These photos on the right show catios. In Portland, they now have catio tours, similar to the Pittsburgh chicken coop tour. So we hope one day catios are so popular that we can have a tour, but it's one option, I guess, to let your cat enjoy the outdoors without the negative impacts on birds. And the reason why we are not negotiating on the cats indoors is that annually in the US, domesticated cats kill well over 2 billion birds. So in addition to the other challenges that they face with habitat loss and climate change, cats are an incredibly huge, have an incredibly huge impact on birds. So we absolutely want to make sure that folks are thinking again about how to holistically create habitat and how they can support birds in their yard. In addition to the cats indoors requirement under wildlife stewardship, we've also, there's a number of different things that people can do in their yard to qualify under wildlife stewardship. And in this case, for example, if they're shooting for the silver level, they only of certification, they just need to do 1. And if they're shooting for that platinum, they'll need to do at least 3. And many folks do well above 3. So some of the options are here on the screen. For example, they can leave their non-vegetable garden cleanup until spring to allow for habitat and food sources for both birds and insects. Another option is under wildlife stewardship are the nest boxes, but we want to make sure that folks understand that the proper placement, type, and maintenance of nest boxes is critical for the nest boxes to serve the ultimate purpose. In urban areas, a lot of times European starlings and house sparrows can actually take over your nest boxes. And if you're not checking them weekly or even more frequently than that, you'll often find that the nest box that you installed for, say, a bluebird actually is has a family of house sparrows and they're thriving. And those non-native species can outcompete our native species. So, we also get excited about nest boxes, but we want to make sure that folks know that, proper placement, type, and maintenance is absolutely critical for these nest boxes to serve their purpose. And one of the last categories, or the last category I'll talk about under wildlife stewardship, is window strikes. Again, thinking about holistically creating good quality, safe habitat and reducing hazards for birds. We work with folks to identify problem windows and then mitigate the hazard that that particular window or windows poses to birds. The fourth category is clean water. So again, thinking about holistic habitat here and making sure that folks with any sort of space can absolutely be certified at least that silver level. So some of the options under this clean water category include, promoting healthy soil by leaving leaves in place or composting, converting turf to meadow, for example, or adding a rain barrel. And the fifth and final category is education engagement. We want to get people, make sure that we're building their habitat knowledge and getting, helping kind of reinforce the cycle of, excitement and supporting habitat and hopefully building habitat and then thinking even beyond their yard potentially. So some of the ways that they can qualify under education engagement include participating in a community science program such as Project Budburst or Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, participating in some of our native plant and habitat programs. I think next month we have a native plants for challenging spaces, and that came out of a lot of requests for, hey, I have a really steep hillside and I'm not quite sure what to do with it, or I have this, incredibly wet clay spot. How do I, what native plants are best for there? So we've absolutely seen an increase in attendance at our native plant programs, which is a wonderful benefit to really also come out of this program. Another option includes recruiting 2 neighbors and to participate in the program to qualify under this education engagement category. And we're excited to start to see some significant clusters. So I get an email notification every time somebody enrolls and absolutely starting to recognize those different street names, for example. So that's really, really exciting. And kind of a sixth unofficial category is invasive plant management. I wasn't, when we launched the program in 2018, I wasn't quite sure if our region was ready for invasive plants to be required. But moving forward, I think we will absolutely consider adding invasive plants to be an official 6th category because there's so much interest from participants in how to manage invasive plants and replace with natives. So during the site visit, we helped to identify invasive plants that are there. And then as part of the report, we include resources on management. But this is, absolutely another way that we're collectively, the participants with some support from Audubon can improve habitat region-wide. And then after folks are ready to get certified, occasionally we can certify them right on site there. But if, say, they need a couple more things to actually become certified, we'll go back out and visit and, for a second site visit and drop off the sign. And we also created this What's in My Backyard custom pocket naturalist guide through Waterford Press. That was our first one. We've actually created a second custom pocket guide custom pocket naturalist guide, for another project. And I just can't they're great to work for. So, work with Waterford Press. So yeah, we've got this nice little additional identification guide that participants can use because hopefully they're going to see a lot more insects and birds, for example, visiting their yard. So regional impact, I'm excited. Tim actually just pulled together this map. And so looking at I get excited every time I look at this. Since 2018, we've had 635 participants across 133 municipalities in 7 counties. 350 of those households have become certified, representing approximately 800 acres. So our headquarters property, for example, Beechwood Farms Nature Reserve, that is absolutely the most popular and well-visited, most well-known, is 134 acres. So, thinking of 6 Beechwood Farm Nature Reserves across the region, or almost 6, I just think it's beginning to understand the impact of these backyard habitats. And then 2022, we've got 80 folks enrolled so far. And then we're also working on the neighborhood focus program that Tim will tell you about here in a couple minutes. Every year, our kind of limiting factor has been staff capacity. This takes about 4 hours from enrollment to completion of that potentially second site visit where we're going to go out and certify folks. So each year we come to a number where we're like, okay, we have 150 or 200, we're just going to have to stop enrollment for this year. So I think that's our biggest limiting factor, is not having enough people and enough resources to get to every single household that wants to participate. Just wanted to show you a few photos here of the different spaces. Just Don Leitner, his wife, actually, she really likes daylilies. So they have an interesting combination of more of a traditional, half of their yard is traditional, and then the other half is just this wonderful mix of native plants. Another photo from Don. I wish I had all the space in the world for Joe Pieweed, just absolutely one of my favorite plants. This is Barb's yard. She actually lives in Millvale, so that's before she moved, this was her house in Millvale, and this, she had a pretty small space. And so I think one example of how you can create habitat in limited space. This is another yard. I think this is more, one of the complaints or concerns that we often hear is that native plants are messy. So this might be one of those yards that, people may consider messy, but I think providing great habitat and is just one way to plant native plants. It doesn't have to be, this is a little more wild, which is my style, but not everybody's style. So I want to highlight some more formal looking yards that are also certified. So this is Lynn and Joe's space, and you see that they actually kept some of their turf, but they were able to reduce a fair amount of it. There's another shot here that shows, it still feels relatively formal, but they've got, you see those native irises down there on the left, for example. So they were able to still maybe fit in with a slightly more traditional look, but provide good habitat in this space. I'm going to turn it over to Tim here, so I have the computer.
Hey everyone, sorry about our technical difficulties, so we have to move the sound around a little bit. As Sarah mentioned, I'm Tim, and I'm the Wetzel land steward, helping Sarah out with actually doing these backyard habitat programs. And as she mentioned, over the first couple of years of the program, it was sort of broad spectrum, and sort of anyone in our region could get into the program as availability allowed. But then we began to think about how we can concentrate these efforts to create a really localized ecological benefit that has the additional benefit that we soon realized of creating these really dense community benefits and these health benefits, such as the benefits associated with gardening and having green space in your view shed in your community can be really beneficial to your mental health and an educational experience of young adulthood all the way up to old age. So there's a lot of both ecological and human benefits that we can get out of focusing these habitats into certain areas. So the community conservation through backyard habitat program was this next iteration, which worked in concert with the backyard habitat program, where we worked with community partners and residents, and really so glad to collaborate with them in a couple of environmental justice communities. And this project was funded by the Department of Environmental Education Fund, as well as some additional funders. And so the neighborhoods that we chose to focus on and were able to find partners to work with in these communities were Garfield, a neighborhood of Pittsburgh that's up there in the north. We have Wilkinsburg, a borough just outside the city of Pittsburgh, and then the Mon Valley, which is a much larger region, down the entire length of the Monongahela River, but really focusing in the McKeesport, Glassport area down there in the southern portion of that map. So in addition to the same benefits and care and attention that people received in the program, they also received a starter garden of native perennials, which is about 18 a flat of plants, and we were really able to, through conversations and sort of initial understandings of people's situations, we're able to pick and choose a little bit on what plants to provide them to give them the best plants for their spaces as availability allowed. We also provided programming for youth and adults. We wanted to be in these communities at the onset of the program, in community centers and spaces and classrooms. But there was very obvious complications to that with COVID. But there was definitely a silver lining to that, where we had to offer programs online, and we're really able to reach a much wider base of the community and be a lot more accessible in some ways to everyone in every one of these communities, not just the participants for these programs, which was really great. Zooming back out, provide a little bit of the regional history and context of these communities without getting too much in the weeds. I think we're probably all a little familiar with the resource extraction industry, the mining and steel that powered Pittsburgh and the Western Pennsylvania region, and largely all of the Appalachian region starting in the 1800s and then peaking in the 40s and 50s. There was a trickle over, into the early 20th century of depopulation, a rise in suburbanization. But then you have that trickle turns into a flood of depopulation with a racist response to desegregation and integration in the 50s and 70s. A lot of these communities were up to 80% white in the 70s and are now somewhere in the 70 to 80% Black. And so that's a huge loss of tax income and historic wealth from these communities, which has resulted in a lot of underinvestment. And that was only continued with the steel crisis in the 70s and 80s, were just packed on, all these foundries and mills closing resulted in further job losses and further economic and underinvestment. And today we still have a few remnants of the industry. The Mon Valley Works is still operating a series of 4 mills and foundries, I think. Here we have the Clairton Coke Works on the photo there, just south of McKeesport and Clairton. But then we have a lot of, at the same time, recognition of how communities are changing and work by community residents and community development organizations to stop that and change that and create a community that they really feel reflects the community that they want. So how do all these communities compare to each other? Just some basic stats here. Populations, Garfield's the smallest, moving up to a borough, a city, the city of Pittsburgh, and then the Pittsburgh Enviro Atlas community is largely the Allegheny County region. It's a good resource to check out the Enviro Atlas for those more interested in environmental and health connections. Garfield and Wilkinsburg are, slightly more dense, not quite super urban, but fairly well built up. The Mon Valley is a little lower, which I think is a reflection of the community-wide, so more regionality of including a city, but also some suburban areas. The more relevant for us and looking at benefits statistics are the tree canopy, impervious surface, and the green space per capita. So tree canopy and impervious surface do a lot to, or are very closely connected to temperatures and urban heat. So those communities that have more trees are cooler by a significant amount of degrees than those with more impervious surface. Impervious surface also relates pretty closely to water quality and resulting into water flows into sewer systems. And in Pittsburgh, we have a long history of that. And then green space is sort of, parks and community spaces, community gardens, and places like that. I think the really interesting stats to look at is the percent of residents within walking distance of a park. We can see that Garfield and Wilkinsburg are well above averages for the city of Pittsburgh and the Allegheny County region, with almost 90% and 70% of residents within walking distance. These parks may be relatively small. You know, there's not a lot of tree canopy. There's not a ton of green space in these communities, but there's very accessible to most residents. Compare that to the Mon Valley and McKeesport, where it's only barely 15%, 18% of residents have the ability to walk to a park entrance. So it's maybe a reflection of the suburban nature of the outliers, but there's also a reflection of how easy it is to get to some of these parks. It's very car dependent, moving out of the city. So Garfield is, just over 3,500 people living in just under half a square mile. Here we have Lauren on one of her visits on the left, looking at some oxeye sunflower on the more urban part of Garfield, but then looking out over on the right, over the west end of the neighborhood, up over the hill, and down into the valley is sort of how Garfield's collected. You can see there's a decent amount of trees. It's not devoid. It's a nice little community. The Bloomfield Garfield Corporation is just one of those community organizations I mentioned earlier that had seen the way communities were changing in the 70s. And so they were a group of parishioners got together in the 70s, I think 73, maybe, and started this community organization to change and make sure that their community was investing in residents. We had some additional funding to offer a pilot of the pilot program, if you will, where we had 24 participants in a first round of the Backyard Habitat program. You can see them here on the map. And now in this second year of the program, funded by the Environmental Education Fund, we have 31 already registered. So it's moving quickly, and we're growing the program already, which is great to see. Wilkinsburg is a borough, as I said, adjacent to the city. It's got just under 16,000 people living in 2.2 square miles. At one point, Wilkinsburg was the most densely populated county or borough in the country, with I think 37,000 people in those 2.2 square miles. So incredibly dense. And with that comes a lot of history. You have the Hamnet Historic District. We have a lot of newer murals, which are sort of reflective of the community artist spaces and community spaces that are growing in Wilkinsburg, and that the way this community is fostering its future. In Wilkinsburg, we were really happy to partner with the Wilkinsburg Pollinator Garden Group, which is a citizen advocacy group that focuses itself on municipal action in Wilkinsburg. They offer an annual garden show of public and private gardens, and then a self-guided walking tour of the borough, where residents are sort of at their own will or at their own pace, see all these different spaces. And there is a pretty large focus on them in native plants and recognition of native pollinators. So we're really happy to just sort of work with them to expand in their own capacity and help them connect with more people in the borough. We had 30 individuals last year, and this year we're working with them to do 5 community spaces. Some of these are vacant lots, artist venues. I think one is intending to be a music venue of some sort, an outdoor music venue with this native garden around, which I think is going to be a really beautiful space. And I think it's also a great opportunity for us to adjust the program and experience how it's going to change in this more community focused space rather than a residential home. How is this going to change it? And then in the Mon Valley, I said the city of McKeesport, but we also worked in 7 other boroughs adjacent: Glassport, Dravosburg, Portview, White Oak, Versailles, and Liberty. And so this much larger area has just over 40,000 people in 18 square miles. So a much larger area, and definitely not quite as condensed as Wilkinsburg or Garfield. Here we have the typical row homes and street of Glassport, where our executive director grew up, actually. And so he was really happy to have us working in his home community. And then on the right here, we have from Dravosburg looking at the hill of McKeesport. So over and to the left, you enter downtown McKeesport, and to the right, you go down to Glassport. You go up over the hill, you're landing in Port View. So it's all pretty well condensed in a close-knit area along the Youghiogheny and the Monongahela. So in this area, we were really happy to collaborate with the Steel Rivers Council of Government and the Tri-Cog Land Bank, operating in the same service area. The Council of Governments is an organization that works to ensure collaboration and communication across municipal lines and ensure that as a whole, as a region, communities are getting uplifted and very bought into the idea that a rising tide lifts all ships. And the Tri-Cog Land Bank is a community trust that works to restore abandoned properties and maintain low-income housing in these regions through restoration and sale of property in these communities. So we have 35 participants across those boroughs. It's really nice to see that within the communities, there's some sort of density. You know, you have that inner area in McKeesport and that lower area of Glassport. So expanding on this core distributed nature reserve and looking at what benefits these actually provide. Here's some mapping of core green areas. This is mostly done on tree canopy. And how our backyard habitats fit in. So looking at Garfield there on the top, you have Allegheny Cemetery, just outside the neighborhood. A resident herd of deer live there and often find their way into Garfield. So having, areas where there's going to be less deer browse are going to help pollinators. And it's building that core and giving more space for pollinators to move out of that core habitat in the cemetery. Down just below that on our right is Wilkinsburg, where we have a really dense, that's Frick Park there on the left, just outside the borough. And then moving westward across the map, we have a much wider distribution of smaller green spaces, of greenways, of smaller parklets. And this transition from the west end of Wilkinsburg, from Frick Park all the way through to this larger area in Churchill and Penn Hills and Edgewood, and moving through that is going to be a nice habitat corridor, so to speak, or pollinator corridor. And then over on the left, the final area, the Mon Valley, it's a little hard to see just because there's so much green space in some of these communities. We have some large conservation properties with the Allegheny Land Trust in Liberty, and Round Hill Park is nearby, and White Oak Park. Moving, there's already habitat corridors through there and ways where pollinators can find habitat niches, but moving them through the city and the urban areas of McKeesport, Glassport, and Port View is going to be really impactful in giving this or sharing this experience and allowing community members to have interactions with pollinators in their yards. So we talked about some of the impacts of distributed nature reserves, and I talked on the get-go about some of the benefits of this, but it's also, I'd like to expand a little more of how our hope is that we can be a catalyst for these communities and provide them an opportunity to connect on something that maybe they didn't connect with before. It's an opportunity to talk to a new neighbor, to share seeds and to share plants, and to really meet new people is the hope. But then some of the health benefits can actually be given a value. The tree canopy in these communities that's already there captures about 450,000 pounds of pollution, which is incredibly sizable. And given the proximity to the Clairton Coke Works, air pollution is already an issue. And that service is valued at about $3 million per year of money, of health costs saved. So a loss of tree canopy and a loss of pollution capture from that is going to increase health costs. So by increasing green space and increasing these backyard habitats, people are creating a more localized, immediate health benefit to themselves of capturing local air pollution in their yards. And there's always a question of allergies and ragweed and some other species may cause allergies, but the broad spectrum of health benefits is pretty vast. And going beyond the backyard, as Sarah mentioned some minutes ago, is the opportunity for neighborhoods to scale up, is to recruit their neighbors and their friends and build this movement and expand upon the movement that's already happening and create a larger collection of these backyard habitats and communities, whether that's through initiatives with community gardens. Here we have the Millvale Community Garden, creating a backyard habitat in their space. So that's providing pollinators for the plants that they're then for community residents, and then also local advocacy. How can citizens get involved in local government and improve the way that people are thinking about native plants on a municipal scale. So that was really an empowering experience for us, is learning how community members were wanting to connect with each other and wanting to get involved with their local governments and get involved with community organizations and sort of how they can play a larger part in this role. And so for us, the next steps are to figure out a way where we can facilitate the connection of these backyard habitat participants. It's a lot easier in a neighborhood. I was visiting these folks and I could say, oh, I would know 3 houses down, they're also in the program. We didn't initially ask if we could share emails, but or contact information with residents. But if I knew people were asking about this, then I was able to connect them on a more on a smaller scale, but on a wider picture of that entire map you saw earlier of our 500 participants, almost 600 participants. How can we connect all those people and get people enthused and enthusiastic, and a way to share seeds and inspiration and of ideas on how to tackle challenges that we just don't necessarily have the staff time to offer everyone. And definitely want to keep focusing on this neighborhood backyard habitat program, working with new neighborhoods and expanding the work we're already doing with these communities, and how we can continue that and work to continue this movement and help collaborate with them and catapult that into municipal action. There's a lot of people in McKeesport and Glassport who are asking about vacant land. The city comes by and sprays the vacant lot with herbicide and chemicals, and how can we work with them to work with municipalities and local governments to maybe plant a native meadow, or maybe look at ordinances and change how they might look at unkept lawns or disconnected downspouts or sewer systems. There's all these different opportunities for us, and hearing what residents wanted and what residents were looking to do is really an impactful way to support and tell us what we need to be doing with these residents. So in summary, for us, the backyard habitat has really helped support regional habitat improvements and regional goals of meeting bird habitat, pollinator habitat. It's helped create actionable change in our service region. But then working with community partners and residents has really helped create meaningful and really personable and individual creation of bird and insect habitat in any space, not discounting anyone. Anyone can feel empowered and impactful in this work of creating pollinators and supporting birds. And then it's also, zooming back out, as I just said, an opportunity for us to learn and be informed, and then also direct how we should conduct future work and what partnerships we can continue to work with communities to keep this movement going forward and to keep supporting the people who want support. So thank you so much. I'm Tim Bine, and this is Sarah Koenig, and we're with the Audubon Society of Western Pennsylvania. We'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Yeah, we did have some questions in the chat come in for you guys. A couple folks wanted to know if you provide certified backyard habitat programs in Westmoreland County.
Yes, Westmoreland is one of our 7 counties.
Okay. And then we had another question of how you could offer this programming through environmental centers.
So are you, in Portland, and I think that I'm certain that their funding structure is absolutely different. I believe they get a lot of funding from municipalities. And related to Westmoreland, I have spoken with the, I think Westmoreland Water Authority there, and they're really interested. And we have a stretch goal of maybe one day having an Audubon staff member working out of the Westmoreland Water Authority office, and maybe because they were interested because of source water protection. So really thinking about what next steps could be. So the idea. So one of the reasons why I mentioned Portland is because they're now at the place where they hired contractors to do the work entirely. So it's done out beyond. It's not done by their staff anymore. And then they have volunteers do the certification visits. So they're really like a next level of the program. So is that, I'm curious, we're absolutely always thinking of how we can expand the footprint and, build, kind of refine the model and scale up. So
I think that was Krista. Krista asked that question. If you want to elaborate, Krista, feel free to unmute here after our next question. But we had someone ask, how do you respond to concern over attracting stinging insects and pests like, wasps or other unsavory creatures?
That is always a bit of a struggle at times. With most wasps are not stinging. There's a few species in that family which are aggressive and can be aggressive, but most of them are sort of, if you leave them alone, they're going to leave you alone. But that is always a worry, and that's something that we do have to make clear. If people do have concerns about this, I often recommend putting the garden away from a space where you're going to be hanging out. Don't put it on your front porch if you're able, if you have the space to maybe move it a bit away.
Great. Tiffany asks if you know of this programming going on in Central PA. So is there anything similar in Central PA?
Yeah, and we actually get a fair amount of questions about people enroll and they're from outside of our 7 counties and we just can't get there. And so I typically direct people to their local Audubon or the local environmental center, master gardeners, those sorts of, so we'd be happy to work with you to try to figure out how to offer it in Central PA. Portland Audubon was kind enough to share their assessment form and all their lessons learned. So we're happy to support, and I should mention that the initial funding was from RK Mellon Foundation. So that's how we were able to develop the nice materials. There is a program fee. We were initially charging $35 for members and $50 for non-members, and they would get a membership for a year. But just this year we went up to $60 and $90 for, $60 for members, $90 for non-members, which almost covers our cost. That's the regular program, not the one that Tim was talking about. That program, the neighborhood focused, is free. So
great. So yeah, if you guys want to have follow-up questions or conversations with them based on the questions I'm asking, thank you guys for putting your email info up in there. Someone else wants to know, how can we push local garden shops to encourage purchases of and carry more native plants?
I know that the Pennsylvania Native Plant Society already publishes a list of native plant nurseries across the state. In terms of established other nurseries that are not already are not already holding a lot of native species, that can be a little difficult. You know, it's a business move on their part. They're not getting a lot of demand. So at least just asking and then starting that conversation of like, oh, hey, you know, I want this plant. Can you give me this plant? You know, I want more milkweed. I want Joe Pye, like, and just being a bird in their ear, so to speak.
I think I found just at my local garden shops I normally go to, if you're willing to spend the money to buy the plants, if you pay up front, they'll order you just about anything. You know, they have access to so much more than what they carry. So I found, you know, ask and you generally shall receive. If you're willing to pay, then certainly they'll make that happen for you. Yeah, Krista was saying she is with the where to go, Philly Environmental Center, and is wondering if they could do it. So yeah, Krista, I would reach out to them and talk and see what your local Audubon chapter is and see if there's, you know, talks of that in your area. We have about 8 minutes left. Are there any other questions? Anyone you can feel free to unmute if you want to ask any additional questions, or if you do not have a microphone, feel free to keep putting them in the chat and I will certainly ask them for you.
Julie, I want to mention one more thing about native plants. You know, we do have a native plant nursery here, which in the 5 years I've been here, it's been incredible to see the demand really go up significantly. So that's great. But we also, you know, where it's a one-woman operation with volunteers and a little bit of extra staff help. She just really can't, she can't grow, you know, we're limited by size and capacity. So we have seen some additional small nurseries or smaller nurseries pop up, which is also really encouraging. We've got some folks just doing it in their backyard. And I know one that just opened in Washington County is, sounds much, I've heard great things about that space.
Arcadia, yeah, I'm down there all the time. Yeah, we partnered with her to provide, she's providing gift certificates to one of our Washington County programs. So we're excited to get gift cards in the hands of folks to hopefully buy some really awesome native plants. But yes, I'm at your native plant opening day every year, buying more plants.
Well, Tim and I will be running the checkout. You should definitely say
no. I certainly will. I know what Roxanne is able to accomplish up there is just incredible for one person. I don't know how she does it. I can barely keep my house plants alive, but kudos to Roxanne for managing all that stuff. Any other questions here? Lots of thank yous coming in on the chat.
And one, I know we didn't go into it today, but one cool thing, the monarchs on the top right, all those monarch caterpillars, that was from actually a native plant foster program, which is something that I also think that, you know, environmental centers and other organizations could consider. You know, we just shared seeds and soil and materials with participants. They took care of the plants for us because, like I said, we don't have a ton of space. And then they were able to keep a portion of the plants to improve their habitat, and they brought us back. You know, say 80, they kept 20% and they brought us back 80%. And so that this monarch caterpillar picture is from one of those foster programs from a backyard habitat also. So there was other milkweed for those little monarch caterpillars, but that picture gets me every time. So if you want to talk native plant foster program, we're also just happy to share our lessons learned from that.
Yeah, I did that too. I grew swamp milkweed for you, and I was so stressed out that I wasn't going to grow enough plants for you. I was out there checking them like every day. I was like, oh no, I'm not going to give them enough plants.
You know, milkweed is tough, and you know, with that program, you know, just sometimes it doesn't work. Even for us, milkweed is challenging. So
I know when I drove them up to Audubon to drop them off, and you know, some people had these absolutely like to the millimeter grown plants, and some of mine were huge and some of mine were sprouting. I was like, oh no. But it was a really cool program. That was such a good idea. Oh, Judith asks, how do set up in a high school? So I guess, could you set this up in a high school?
Absolutely. In terms of like we do have a community science on the school ground program where we were, you know, trying to create backyard or creating similar habitat spaces and then working with teachers to collect community science data. So and there actually was one foster program participant was at an elementary school as well, I think.
Oh.
So all of this can have, those same 5 categories plus invasive plants could absolutely be applied to any space.
Yeah, for sure. Any other questions here? Oh, someone very early on asked if anyone had a good resource for the catios. I see quite a few people feel the same way about outdoor cats as I do, but looking for like either purchase and build catios or order a catio, maybe some DIY plans. If anyone has any resources for that, if you could put it in the chat, that would be awesome.
We're still trying, we love cats. Many of us have indoor cats, but we're still trying to figure out that sweet space of keeping cats safe and keeping birds safe.
Kennett Square is doing a Meadow Eatos program and growing native little meadows in areas around town. That's so cute. That's such a good idea. I would love to do that in my town. Kat, I will put my email in the chat. I'm also finishing up my Master Gardener training this week. So that could be my Master Gardener project, Meadow Eatos. Any other questions? I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.